Hi there and welcome to this video. I hope you're all keeping well and safe in these challenging times. Obviously, with the COVID-19 pandemic going around the world, many of us are more restricted to what we can and can't do. We're in a period of physical isolation quite a lot. Here in the UK, we can only go out once a day for limited exercise, and therefore it's challenging us, and as a content producer here on YouTube, I'm having to think about what I'm producing content around, how I'm limited in doing that, and therefore being a bit more creative about different topics I cover. So today's video is going to be a little bit more of a storytelling type style. One of the things I've been doing, because I'm having to spend a bit more time in the house rather than out of the house, is I've been going through my camera gear. I've accumulated quite a lot over time. Some of it quite old, some of it in different places. So I've been retrieving it from different locations, bringing it together, cleaning some of it, and becoming reacquainted with some of it that I've forgotten was there. And one of the things I found was my very first camera. It was a hand-me-down, I think, from one of my grandparents. It's a Ricoh 35 ZF. The 35 signifying it's a 35mm film camera, the ZF signifying it's a zone focus version of it. It was produced in 1976, or started production in 1976, should I say. A fairly simple camera by today's standards when I compare it to my Z6 and Z7. It's a 35mm camera, so obviously to put the film in, you open up the back, you put your film cassette in here, pull it across, attach it on this side, and then use the shutter wind to make sure it's attached. Close up the back and then wind it on until you get to the piece of film that's capable of being exposed. And then when you get to the end of your 12 or 24 or 36 exposures as it was in those days, you push the little button on the bottom and wind it back until you hear the film disengage from the spool at this end. Pull it back until it's gone back into its cartridge so no light gets in. Pop it up and take the film out. So nice basic 35mm camera. As I said, it was a hand-me-down from one of my grandparents, I think around about 1977, 1978, so it was still fairly new in the context of that era. It's a nice camera, it's not through lens TTL, it's a rangefinder style, so you look through the back here and there are some guidelines to show what's in shot. You had to think about composition because it wasn't perfectly aligned. It's a bit like shooting those rifles at the fairground. There's a slight kink in it and you have to work out exactly what's in shot. There is a little meter on the side, and that was run from a battery down the bottom here, a little cartridge here. That's a mercury type battery, so you can't necessarily get them as easily these days. I'm going to look to see if I can get a battery so I can get this working again. And that powered the needle up the side of the viewfinder, which showed you whether you were in exposure or not, or what the aperture setting was needed to be in exposure. So it didn't even show you whether the exposure you had set was correct, it showed you what aperture you needed. All of the controls really were on this fixed lens at the front here. It's a 40mm lens, f2.8, fixed aperture lens. On the front of the dial here you've got the focus ring, which goes from about 3 feet to infinity. So really simple to focus. You've then got the shutter speed dial here, and that's got a bulb setting, and then it goes from 1/8 of a second up to 1/500th of a second. And then finally the numbers in red here right close to the body are the aperture settings, so f2.8 up to f16. There's also an automatic setting, and if you put it into that setting it becomes a shutter priority camera, and use that with the meter to work out what shutter speed did you need. So pretty basic by today's standards. On the front of the lens here you've got the setting for setting the ASA or ISO of the film you've put in there. So you had to set it correctly so the metering was correct. And at the top you've got a little sensor, light sensor, which powered the metering. So all in all, a fairly compact, simple camera. And it was a great camera. It's quite robust, it's got a metal body. It's got a hot shoe on the top here, or cold shoe should I say probably, on the top there to put a flash. And it was a great camera to learn the basics of photography. I was about 8 to 10 years old at the time, and getting into photography, and you had to understand how to shoot in manual mode. And that has stood me in great stead as I've moved forward through using different cameras, understanding how the shutter speed worked with the aperture speed that worked with the ISO. It got you thinking about composition as well. So all the technical aspects of photography, when you think about composition, because it was a film camera, you couldn't easily crop in at a later date, so you had to use the Mark I tripod, your legs, to move around to get the composition you wanted. I didn't have a dark room, so what I shot was what came back from the processing lab. So a really good starting point for photography. And that's, as I say, stood me, I think, in good stead as I've moved through different, more advanced cameras over time. So I was using this when I was about 8 to 10 years old. The first time I used it was on a Cub Scout camp, and I found the album of photos recently. And it was July 1978, and it's an album of black and white photos. There's 12 of them in here, so I managed to get 12 good images off of a 12 exposure film. I think it was for a Cub Scout badge, so I was earning a badge for photography. And it's really interesting to look back through these photos. They are reasonably well exposed, considering the dynamic range of films that were you could use in the camera. Some of them, or most of them, the sky is slightly overexposed to get the exposure right in the foreground. But it's great. It's quite nostalgic to find this camera and then find the album of photos to look back at what I achieved with it. They're all pretty much in focus. So let's take a quick look at some of those photos. So here are some of the photos. Apologies for the quality of the photos because they were printed on a really nice gloss paper, so you do get a few reflections. They're obviously all black and white, a square format, so eat your heart out Instagram. We were doing square format a long time ago. They were printed about 9 centimeters by 9 centimeters, so 3.5 inches by 3.5 inches, so they're quite small. As you can see, the dynamic range of the film wasn't that great. By modern day standards, the resolution is pretty low on them, but pretty well exposed photos, I think. So that was quite a nostalgic, blast from the past in those photos. And I think about the processing of the film. When you got the film out of the camera, I would then have to, as a sort of 8 to 10 year old, I didn't have a dark room, so we had to use a postal processing service. So you'd get the envelopes, you would fill in all your details on the envelope, and then on the little bit you tore off to put round the film cartridge, you have to get your parents to write a cheque, pop it all in there, take it down to the post it off to them, and then wait. 1 week, 2 weeks later, you'd hear a big thunk through the front door, and you knew that was your photos coming back. And you'd run there, and the anticipation of opening the envelope to get that little folder of photos out, and sometimes your heart sank because you realised you got these settings wrong. Sometimes it leapt because it really, everything had come together in the images, a bit like my Cub Scout camp ones here. And that's something perhaps we don't get as much of today, that anticipation. With digital photography, you quickly look at you chimp it on the back screen, and you can take another shot, or you can bracket the shot, or you can post-process it to change it, or you can crop it in post-processing, which I couldn't do in those days. So I had to get it right in camera if I wanted the right images to come out. And that's something that actually is a real skill, and that's something that I really, learned the hard way with cameras like my Ricoh 35ZF. I think there is a way we can create that today, and I've been doing quite a bit of printing of my images recently. And watching the print come off the printer, I get some of that emotion back that I used to get from sending away my images and waiting for them to come back through the door. While I was looking through my various camera gear, I also found this, which is, was a bit later. This I bought around 1990, and it's an Olympus camera. I bought it for going traveling through Latin America, and I bought it because it had a lovely, nice hard, lens cap to it, and you pull this back, and if it had a battery, and the lens would extend, and it had a zoom lens on it. It's got a little LCD on the top. I think it's got a pop-up flash here somewhere, if I can. Yeah, there's a pop-up flash that comes up just on the side here, so it's quite versatile. And actually it's still a 35mm camera. It's pre-digital, and it's still got a film cartridge in there. I don't know when that's from, but if I get a battery, I'll probably try and get that out of there and process just to see what's on it. Bit of a blast from the past. As I say, I used it while I was traveling around Latin America, and you can see it's taken quite a beating, but stood up quite well. Yeah, we were using DEET as anti-mosquito, an anti-mosquito kind of thing. And DEET, as many of you will know if you've used it, is pretty harsh on plastic. So you can see my fingerprints on the shutter release button where the DEET has sort of etched them into the shutter release. A lot of the markings have come off with the DEET. So a really interesting camera, and really interesting to get it out of my camera bag. I think what I'm going to be doing is seeing if I can find a mercury battery for the 35mm camera here, see if I can get some film, see what's online to do that, and see whether I can set myself a bit of a camera project around using my Ricoh 35ZF and see what comes out to rekindle that 35mm really basic manual approach to photography. So I hope you've enjoyed my little reminiscence here on my first camera. What was your first camera? Let us know in the comments below. It'd be really interesting to hear what it was, understand whether you've still got it, and whether you could bring that back to life as a bit of a project while we've got a bit more time on our hands. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the subscribe button below, hit the notification bell, and you'll be notified of future videos. And keep safe, and I look forward to seeing you on a future video.